Hello, everyone, and welcome to You'll Probably Agree. And I haven't had this guy on for a while, but he's an old friend of the show and host of Kicking the Seat with Earth's Mightiest Critics panel that I'm happy to be a part of. It's Ian Simmons. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about this movie. Like you have no idea.
Excellent. Well, you know what? Let's jump straight into it. I picked this movie because with everything that's going on in the news of the cancellation of Stephen Colbert and basically everyone's right to free speech kind of being threatened of being taken away, I thought, man, well, what's a movie that resembles free speech? And one of the movies on the list was Lenny. And when you picked that, I thought that's a great choice because that's literally a movie about silencing comedians. But having said that, could you give me a little synopsis of the movie and your thoughts on Lenny?
Yeah, Lenny, 1974, directed by Bob Fosse, tells the story of Lenny Bruce, born Leonard Schneider, who was a stand-up comic who really came to prominence in the early 1960s, kind of starting up from the underground in the late 50s, mid to late 50s, and his kind of troubled relationship with his wife, Honey, played by Valerie Perrine, who most people recognize as the original Miss Tessmacher from
Hmm.
Superman 78, and his battles with drugs and censorship, and just struggling to find his voice and use it and also fight back against the system that wanted to repress him. So it's kind of a tragic story, but a very powerful film. I had not seen this before, strangely enough, which is really odd because I'm a big Lenny Bruce fan. I got his books here.
Wow.
The first time I heard about him was in 1990's Pump Up the Volume, because folks might remember Christian Slater's character goes to the school library to check out this book, How to Talk Dirty and Influence People. And I was like, who's that guy? And, then I was off to the races, but I'd never seen this movie, but it was on my bucket list to check off. And Dustin Hoffman gives an amazing performance. I don't think I've seen a biopic quite like this, mostly in
Hmm.
terms of its editing. I think it's brilliant. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I'm also excited to talk about your thesis statement, because we might have a bit of a disagreement about what's going on there in terms of the culture. So we'll get into that.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Uh yeah, one thing I liked about this movie cuz I only saw like once before a long time ago and didn't really remember much about it. It's funny. This movie is about stand-up comedy, but the movie is pretty much completely devoid of comedy. It's a very dark, depressing sort of film about addiction, about the limitations of freedom of speech, and really what it's like to be a comedian. As someone who's actually been the director of media in a comedy club for like 6 years, I could spot a lot of the elements within the world of comedy that are still prevalent today. For instance, Lenny's battle with addiction. If you work in the stand-up comedy world, you know that place is filled with drugs. Whenever I would go into my office just to do some work, the place would stink like weed all the time. People were always getting high in there. There were people like at my job who would be, I didn't participate in it, but they would be like doing coke in the bathroom. So the world of stand-up comedy perpetuates drug use, and it's kind of because it's like this counterculture sort of world
Yeah.
where it's going against what's the norms of society, what the actual what's deemed right and wrong. And this movie really represented that. And it's a tragedy about someone who was ahead of their time and paid the price for it. And some of Bruce's acts can be seen as quaint today, especially like a lot of the sexual stuff. Like if you've ever been to a comedy club, all everyone ever talks about is sex, and it gets very repetitive, like constantly just hearing my dick my pussy all the time. It gets really old. uh but yeah, I actually enjoyed it. The movie kind of felt like an underground documentary, but it also kind of felt like you're in someone's own personal hell. Like visually, it reminded me a lot of like Raging Bull, where like it's intentionally black and white and it's just like filled with smoke all the time. So yeah, it's it's a biopic that, like you said, you don't really see very often, because most biopics, they show the highlights of somebody's life. They, they show, like, there's no scenes in Lenny where Lenny's like, "That's a great joke," and then there's like a montage of him writing the joke and finding it. Like, there's nothing like that, and I appreciated the film's unconventionality to it. Like, if you didn't know the guy would become famous, you wouldn't get that he's famous in this movie, because you never see him in his mansion or anything. He's always like in these rundown
You do,
apartments and stuff
you
like
see it
that.
briefly. There's a
Yeah.
couple of shots because we see that he does get a big house, and there's one where he's got like this, I guess, Indian servant kid or something who's bringing him coffee or taking the coffee away, and you see him at a table. I can't remember if he's reading the paper or jotting something down,
Yeah.
but it is just these kind of interstitial like flashes. It's not the point of the film where he's strung out and wandering around his mansion like, oh, woe is me. It does really focus on his time coming up through different kinds of clubs, and then that amazingly disastrous set in Chicago,
Mhm.
shortly before his death. I call it the King Kong set, where he's out there in his raincoat. It's a medium, or it's like sort of a wideish medium shot. The camera
Yeah.
doesn't move, and he
It
does it
doesn't cut
all, I think,
for,
in
like,
one
3
take.
minutes. Yeah.
It felt like much longer than that in a good
It
way,
might
but
be. Yeah.
man, I feel like I should have seen this movie a long time ago, because I would have much more respect for Dustin Hoffman as an actor. I think he's a great actor, but now he's like, much like those cops that were lined up against the wall in the club waiting to arrest him. Dustin Hoffman belongs in the Mount Rushmore of actors, I think.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he did get canceled, probably for for good reasons. From what I vaguely remembered, I think he was like trying to date like one of his daughter's friends, and she was like 16 at the time or something like that. But
That's a new one on me. I missed
yeah,
that one.
yeah, that's what he got canceled for. But like, there's a whole video where John Oliver pretty much just grills him on it at like a public event. But I mean, yeah, it's funny that this is a movie about someone who got canceled, and it's a movie that resembles cancel culture, because today we are facing the same problem. And this isn't going to be a podcast where I'm going to say, "Oh, the right wing, they're terrible, they're getting rid of," like, no, the left wing does it too. And that's the funniest thing about it. Like, there are people who got canceled who didn't really deserve to be. There was a story where Liam Neeson was talking about how he knew this talk show friend of his, and there was some girl telling a very sad story, and she begins to cry, and he like pats her back, and her bare back was exposed, and immediately he pulls back and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." She said, "Oh, it's okay." He even called her, told her, "Hey, are you sure this is okay?" She said it's fine. And then a few days later, he gets a phone call from her lawyer. Like, that's an example of someone who didn't need to lose their career, just because of mob mentality. And
Yeah.
then, of course, you got the other side where, you got the president who's canceling shows on CBS because the hosts don't agree with everything they're saying about him. And
Well,
they
that's,
say
I
it's
mean,
a financial decision, but.
but I mean, that's where we're going to disagree. The
Yeah.
president didn't cancel Stephen Colbert. This was a decision that was a long time coming. Colbert may be the top of the late night ratings, but late night ratings have plummeted consistently year over year, and he was losing, by most estimates, $40 million a year for CBS. Now, there is this big Skydance merger coming up, and that does need to be approved by the president, or it needs to have government approval in order to go through. But if you look at it, Stephen Colbert did say some disparaging things about the CBS lawsuit that they had to settle with regards to Trump. But full disclosure, I fully agree with that settlement. I think what they did was downright dirty on 60 Minutes with the whole Kamala interview.
Mhm.
But the idea that they're going to come out and announce that Stephen Colbert is not only off the air, but they're canceling the Late Show 3 days after he makes this disparaging remark, the people who are buying into that don't understand how business works. And on top of that, Paramount also just paid out Parker and Stone $1.5 billion for 5 more
Mhm.
years of South Park. And the day after that happens, they come out with this cartoon where they basically replace the Saddam Hussein character with Donald Trump, having him
Mhm.
cozying up and getting into bed with Satan. And, they're not being extradited to, Gator Gitmo or whatever they're calling it. So I think
Yeah.
this whole thing has been blown out of proportion. Stephen Colbert, on top of that, he said he didn't come out and say they axed me today. He said that in May of 2026, the entire show is going off the air. So that's not
Mhm.
cancellation. That's a contract not being renewed. Now, what we're talking about in Lenny, that is definitely censorship. You have literally cops marching in as arms of the state and pulling someone off the stage for what they're saying, which was at the time against the law. But we don't have that problem anymore. We're dealing with something different.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can understand that. I guess my concern is that Trump sued Paramount for $16 million. They
Yeah.
paid the lawsuit, and I yeah, late night is kind of a dying breed. I feel like cable, as a matter of fact, is starting to go away. We still haven't found the technology or the bandwidth to match basic cable with the internet, because we still constantly have crashing internet speed. Like when they tried to do the Mike Tyson fight versus Jake Paul. Like all I remember was buffering, 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 Mike Tyson's ass, buffering, buffering, and then like a little bit of the fight. So like we still got a long way to go with that. But I mean, even if I don't totally agree with you on the Paramount thing, I'm not going to be like, "Oh, you're wrong," and I'm right. Blah, blah, blah. Like that's stupid. That's not going to get us anywhere, you know. But I feel like we have comedians now who still they can get canceled because people don't uh want to hear things that they don't like. For instance, when Dave Chappelle did the whole LGBTQ arguments, there were people who were saying, "Oh, his career should be over. You know, he's terrible. This and that and the other." And then, there were some people who were defending him, but I mostly just heard people just going after him.
Hmm.
And he had this whole story. If you actually saw the special, where he had a friend who was, I believe, transgender, and she ended up taking her own life because
Yeah.
she was friends with Chappelle, and everyone from her own community jumped after her because she was in association with him. And that's the problem with cancel culture in general. And there's actually a really interesting part in the movie where I feel like maybe we even went back a little bit, because Lenny at one point he goes on the stage and he says, there's a lot of, and he says F word jokes, but it's
Hmm.
FAG, not
Right.
FUCK.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's not a lot of dyke jokes. And then I'm just thinking, you can't even make any jokes about the LGBTQ community anymore unless you're part of that community. And I think when we're silencing comedians, either through popular culture or through the public or through politics, we're losing the point of what comedy should be, which is comedy's meant to be subversive. It's meant to look at the dark side, dark elements of life, and be able to laugh at them, so then we can like move on with our lives and exist, because existence can be pretty miserable. And I think that's what good comedy tries to do. I think that's what Lenny Bruce did with a lot of his comedy. Like I'm not a huge fan of his. I think some of his jokes, especially like when he goes on stage and he's using every single racial slur he can, like I get the point of the bit. I get that he's trying to say, if we take power away from these words, then these words won't have as much impact. But the way in which he was doing it didn't really seem to have a concise punchline to really make it work.
And I think,
And
and you're right, and I think that is the reason he was the gateway to generations of comics who would
mm-hmm,
come after him and adopt more of that preacher kind of lifestyle or
mm-hmm.
delivery. I mean, you look at Lenny Bruce and you can't help but see George Carlin,
Oh
especially with
yeah,
his fascination with words and how he used language and what things mean. And then you also have my personal hero, Bill Hicks,
yeah,
who, especially towards the end of his life when he was, he knew he was dying of cancer and he was giving his last shows. I think it was Rant in E minor was his final official album. He goes off, and it tends to be very funny, but also very dark because he was sharp like that. But he would get into these kind of lectury rants where you could just feel the audience was like, "What are you doing up there? I don't understand this." And they
yeah,
probably understood it later in retrospect. But much like Lenny Bruce, he was just ahead of his time. I love that bit in the club where he starts off by saying, "Are there any N words in the audience tonight?"
yeah.
And you see like the Fosse's camera captures like there's a ton of I'm gonna make sure I put some space in here, a ton of black faces in the audience.
Right.
um,
Okay.
and then you're like, oh wow, where is this going? And then he says, are there any? And he starts like listing off the derogatory names for Italians and Jews and Irish people and all that, and basically covering everybody in the club in a way that Spike Lee would kind of capture in Do the Right Thing decades later, because he did that whole montage of the different ethnicities kind of calling each other out and just like
Mm-hmm.
spitfire, slurs. But what he does there is he gets right up to the point of
Mm-hmm.
igniting the powder keg, into the point where he's getting into the face of the angriest yet most stoic looking black guy in the club, like literally leaning over the table with the
Yeah.
microphone in his face and making him crack and
Yeah.
helping him to see what he's trying to do, and pointing out we all need to be together in this. What they're trying to do to us through language is bullshit. We need to take the power out of it and take the power back. Now, it's not funny, but it's powerful and it's entertainment. So I don't know exactly what you call that.
Yeah, it's funny because there's like different types of stand-up comedy, and I think, like, for instance, George Carlin is like a spoken word artist, sort of comedian, where he used to start by doing bits that were like straight up stand-up comedy, where he would observe the differences between baseball and football, for instance, and then you would have him later in his career where he would just do like long lectures about the hypocrisy of religion and stuff like that. And it's like there were little jokes inserted in there, but a lot of it was, lecturing. But it was entertaining lecturing because of the way he was able to make words match together. It kind of felt a little bit like poetry, and he could do it in a way that no other comic really could. And yeah, Lenny Bruce kind of paved the way for that. And when you look at stand-up comedy today, we don't see a lot that's really subversive. And when we do, we get a lot of people, like I think Shane Gills recently was at ESPN and he made some jokes, and immediately people were like, "Oh, cancel him. That's terrible. You can't say that joke." And I'm going, "Well, this is the problem. You guys don't like it when the right wants to cancel people, but then on the left, when they say something you don't like, you want to cancel them." And it
Well, and
just
that's
becomes this smorgasbord of, yeah,
Well, I
craziness.
mean, but that's what's so interesting about this episode and this conversation is
Yeah.
because for the last 4 years, the left would refuse to acknowledge that cancel culture exists. You would
Wow.
have people
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
kicked off of Twitter for alternative political beliefs. You're like, nobody's getting kicked off Twitter. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, Elon Musk buys it and allows everybody on, and then all the left are like, "This place is full of people who got kicked off Twitter. We're moving to Blue Sky."
Yeah.
So it's not exactly comedy, but it speaks to the kind of the weird shifting sands of hypocrisy in the political discourse. One quick note about George Carlin. Did you ever meet him in your adventures in stand-up comedy?
Not when I was working there, but I did actually see him live 2 years or a year before he died. And it was kind of an odd special to go to because the whole stand-up special was about suicide and death. And then like the next year he died. But yeah,
It's
they aired that special. It was like his second to last special they aired on HBO. I saw it in Waukegan and then I saw the aired version. Yeah.
Man, I did not. I think I started watching that special and it was too dark for me. And that's saying
Yeah.
something. But then I think it was after that, if I'm not mistaken, he wrote this book called When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops? And he actually came to the Barnes and Noble out here in Skokie. And I went with some friends to meet him. And he came out and he was the friendliest, warmest
Mhm.
guy. I was almost disappointed because I grew up knowing him as this like acerbic kind of guy, but he came out and he did from memory. There's like a 10-page rap almost that opens up that book. And I know he wrote it and he'd probably done it 1,000 times. So it was just amazing to see him come out and do it as if it was coming out of his head for the first time.
Yeah.
But that is the kind of the energy, the spirit that I saw in Dustin Hoffman's performance in Lenny, but drowned in darkness and morbidity. It's a fascinating fascinating movie.
Yeah, because Lenny was someone who wanted to bring smile and laughter to everyone's faces. He has this very colorful, fun personality and very free thinking because, like, they didn't discuss in the movie. I read about it. I guess his mother was a dancer and a performer, and she had him do stand up at her club. And that's kind of what ignited him to do stand up in the first place. And like when you see him with his mom and their family, like the grandmother doesn't like all the inappropriate stuff he's saying, but the mom does. And you kind of see like where he kind of got that inspiration from. And yeah, he's someone who brought a lot of positivity to the plate, but unfortunately it was a lot of the addiction and stuff like that ended up ending his life. But that's just because the addiction is just something that is promoted in the stand-up world. Like, I mean, comedians, they drink like fishes. Like they drink like there is no tomorrow. Like I couldn't keep up with them when I was at the club. They're like, you want to say like like every night when I would finish work, they're like, you want to come out? And I'm like, oh God, no. I'm tired. I just shot 3 shows, but
And so,
it's yeah.
and I know we are talking about Lenny, but I'm fascinated by this. You're talking about like comedians of every stripe, like
Mhm.
newcomers to legends, I assume. Is that right?
Not like legends, but like we get like a lot of up and comers. Like I mean, the most famous guy we got in the club, who was it? There was one guy who Bobcat Goldthwait made a documentary on, and he was in the club like right before he passed away, because I had that gift where people see me and then they die, and
I'll cover my eyes. No.
yeah, yeah, I'm like Medusa. But we had him. We had Keenan Thompson. We've had oh God, there was, I think, like Brian something was like his name, Brian Grazer. It's funny, like I like stand up, but I'm not like obsessed with it. So like I remember like once my boss was like, "Hey, do you like stand up?" And I'm like, "I'm the director of media here. I hope I do." and and then he introduced me to like this real famous comedian, and I like recognize his face. But yeah, like in terms of the most famous comedians I met, it was like George Carlin, Patton Oswalt, oh gosh, who else? There was a few others, but
Well, I
yeah.
guess what I'm getting at is like if the people like when they're inviting you out and stuff, and you're kind of a lot of people would say, oh, if there's a comic who's even moderately famous and they're like, hey, come hang out with me, the
Yeah.
temptation would be like, yeah, go have drinks with that guy. But if you're at the point where like you've been around the scene and you know what kind of substance abuse and darkness, it can be kind of weird. Like, oh, I don't know if I want to see this person as an ugly drunk or possibly get
Yeah.
into an
Yeah.
altercation or something.
There's definitely some comics who are like famous enough where I'm like, okay, I'll have a drink with you. And mostly I would go out with people, but like they would end up going out like almost every night,
Mm.
and they would just drink themselves into oblivion. And I knew like if I went out with them, I would probably drink myself into oblivion too. So I had to
Well,
stop. Yeah.
Well, it's great that you had that self-awareness and that self-control, frankly. And that's what, one of the things that I think is captured so well in this movie is it's not exactly hypocrisy, but it's the idea of even the kind of the framing device of Lenny Bruce later in his career when he's got the kind of the hippie beard and he's on stage and recounting his life, but telling it through these funny kind of anecdotes. We see those anecdotes cut with the kind of tragedy of the reality that he lived through, and
Hmm.
however he was able to mine that again, that darkness into a stand-up, bit. It's fascinating. But what I loved about the editing in this is it was so precise and sharp, but constantly surprising. At one point, he's on the stage and he's talking. He says integration, and he's getting ready to talk, but like do this racial bit. But it cuts to him in a hotel opening up the door, and this black lady comes in, and the intimation is that they, got it on or something. But it's just again, the audience is seeing and hearing something that they're going to get something out of, but not necessarily realizing the darker nature of the truth of what's behind those words in terms of the person who's delivering that message.
Yeah, and there was also some interesting parts where they sort of like intercut his acts with reality. Like at one point, he's talking about children. They cut to him feeding his kid,
Yeah.
and then I think he's talking about lesbians, and then they cut to his three-way with him and Honey and this other girl, and that scene was very interesting because most three-way scenes would be edited like as hot and sexy, and instead this is cut like it's very sad and insecure. Like it's very quiet. There's not a lot of noise coming from everyone, and there's no music. There's no music throughout this whole film, as a matter of fact.
Except for
And
the incidental stuff of like someone on stage, like, playing,
yeah, like diegetically, there's music,
exactly.
but yeah, non-diegetically, there's no score. And yeah, like when they're having that three-way, they're just kind of like slowly kissing each other, and they're just kind of looking at each other, and there's just this uncomfortable silence where it feels like Lenny might be thinking, maybe I shouldn't be here, but he's taking himself further and further and further down towards whatever can give him instant gratification when he can't find any real happiness, because this movie really is about how miserable comedians are. Because unless you're rich and famous, there's no financial stability in stand-up comedy. Like unless you are Kevin Hart, or Amy Schumer, or one of the top echelon comics, you are not going to find a living, in this profession. And this movie sort of reflects that, but it also sort of reflects how, like, even after you become famous and after you have all these things, it doesn't get any better, especially when culture is not on your side.
Oh yeah, I mean, going back to Bill Hicks, he would talk about he had a bit about how he was on his flying saucer tour. He said, which means like flying saucers, I too am appearing in small southern towns in front of handfuls of hillbillies. And he
Yeah.
said, and I'm starting to doubt my own existence. And that's, you're right. Going back to that threesome scene, it's hard to tell because it's like a montage of body parts and a lot of close-ups. But what struck me was there was a hand, and I want to assume it was Honey, Valerie Prine's hand, caressing a leg or a thigh or a buttock, but it's very tentative. Usually in these movies, like sliding across like silk. This was like
Yeah.
rough, almost like
Yeah.
this is uncomfortable. I'm not quite into this. And it just says so much without, a whole lot of heavy-handed dialogue. There's a little bit of conversation later when Lenny starts to like accuse Honey of liking it too much and then kind of blames her for getting hooked on drugs, even though she was the one who was roped into that whole scene by him.
Hmm.
It's a Lenny Bruce does not come out well in this movie, and it's one
Mm-mm.
of those hard to separate the art from the artist things of like, yeah, I would not want to meet or hang out with Lenny Bruce, but I'm glad he existed. And I'm also glad that other people are the ones who helped shape his life and not me.
Yeah, yeah, it's sad because he was a guy where it's like you could hang out with him, but you could also wind up shooting up heroin with him or something like that. And
In a Detroit flop house, yes.
yeah, yeah. And one of the funniest bits is that like there's one part I think they show at the beginning of his career, and he's doing clean humor, and it's just bombing. And it kind of like speaks as to how lame clean humor is because, for instance, when you look at a lot of Jerry Seinfeld's bit, I kind of get bored watching them because there's nothing that they're not really saying much. They're just kind of like everyday observations that almost like anyone can make. I think like, yeah, he was part of the genius behind Seinfeld, but really like, Larry David was like the main guy behind that show as Curb Your Enthusiasm has proven. But like, why do you think it's so hard to do like clean jokes compared to dirty jokes? And like, what's like the difference between the two?
I don't know. Well, I can't speak to the difficulty of it because I'm
Yeah.
not a professional comedian.
Right. Right.
Um, but I mean, I think there's plenty of examples of clean comics out there who have, made something of themselves. I mean, Jim Gaffigan,
Yeah. I was about to say. Yeah.
he's the hot pockets guy, but he's also got several albums of things, a lot of it's about food, a lot of it's observational humor, but a lot of it's also funny. Um, Another name I'm going to bring up that, he's not exactly clean, but some of his best bits are the ones that aren't crazy offensive is Dane Cook. You take
Hmm.
a few of the swear words out of his routines, they're not hindering on, being dirty. And you've got, some really funny, again, observational things. Um, Damn, there was someone else that I was thinking of, but, maybe it comes down to demand, like people go out to a comedy club, they're drinking, they're paying a high, premium to get in or whatever, and they want something a little dangerous, something that's adult. Like clean humor might be seen as family friendly humor, stuff you want to bring the kids to. And you might have more insight into this, having been around that scene. Like, do people come into the comedy club wanting to be challenged, wanting to see something like controversial and edgy, or do they even care? Like if Jim Gaffigan shows up where they're on a night where they're supposed to be a filthy comic, is he going to get booed off stage, or is comedy comedy?
It depends on who the who the audience is going to go see. Mostly they don't know or care. Mostly they get very drunk, and it's usually the people in the front row who are going to become part of the audience work. And everyone else there, they go there, they get their 2 drink minimum. They want to end up just having a good time. And yeah, it's funny. Like when I sit in a lot of comedy shows, like I kind of became like a comedy snob in a way, where I could see where a punchline was coming from like a mile away. And
Yeah.
there were certain comics where the audience would love them, and I was like, I don't understand why people find this person so funny, but that's because it's subversive. And yeah, I think a lot of the sex humor at a certain point just bored me, because I just heard about it all the time. Whether you have a penis or a vagina, it's like it's both equally funny and unfunny and boring and lame. But yeah, like usually the dirty jokes would be the ones that I remember that were the ones that I liked a lot. But it depended on the context of the jokes that make it work. And I think when it comes to comedy, context is a huge thing between what's a good subversive joke versus like stupid, dirty humor. And there's a 30-second clip where I compare 2 comics together. And I think the first clip is a good example of dirty humor, where the other one is a bad example. And you might disagree with me, but let
All
me know
right.
what you think. Here it is.
Well, we have more ways to describe dirty words than we actually have dirty words. Cursing, cussing, swearing, and all I could think of was shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits.
Well, Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating a curds and whey. Long came a Spidey, sat down beside, he said, hey, what's in the bowl, bitch? Oh!
Now it's funny. When I was a kid, I loved Dice Clay. I was like, "Oh, he's so edgy." And then I got older. I'm like, "This is stupid." Like, all he's doing, like the whole joke behind the Little Miss Muffet thing is that he calls her a bitch. Is that? Is that?
Well, it's yes, and
Yeah,
I haven't listened to his. I think the last thing
yeah,
I listened to of his was Dice Rules, and that was the
yeah,
bomb when I was 12. But it is, I think, pretty great comedy when you hear it the first time, because
yeah,
it's a twist. It's subversive. You don't expect the spider to come down and
yeah,
say, "Hey, what's in the whatever."
yeah,
I love those nursery rhymes. I like some of his stand up, but after you, like you're saying, you get into the rhythm of his shtick, then you can see where it's coming from, right?
yeah.
I want to talk about the difference between clean and dirty humor as relates back to a very crucial scene in Lenny. I think it's my
Hmm.
second, perhaps, favorite scene, is when he's in court and this judge is about to throw the book at him for doing an obscene routine on stage, where the cops pulled him off the stage, and he pulls some kind of emotion or something to get an extension, and the judge is like, so I understand you have a show coming up on Saturday. If I hear that you perform any of this material or use these words, then I'm going to use that and throw the book at you when you come back into court next week. And so Bruce goes to the club, and there's that big tension. You got cops on either side of the wall just
Yeah.
waiting to pounce. And he comes out, and what had happened was, pardon my French, I'm just reporting, I'm your humble narrator here. He had used the word cocksucker or cocksucking
Yeah.
specifically at the end of his routine. That's when they pulled him off the stage the previous night. So he comes out, and there's that tension of like, is he going to risk getting arrested again, or is he going to skirt this somehow? And what he does is he just censors himself, but he uses that as an opportunity to discuss the hypocrisies. Like, anybody in here have ever heard that word? Has anyone here ever said that word? Has anyone
Hmm.
here ever done that word?
And they
And
raise
then
their
he's like,
hands. They all raise
yeah,
their hands. Yeah.
exactly. And then he's like, you, sir, have you ever had your blank blanked, or
Yeah.
something like that? And you, ma'am, have you ever blanked a blank? And then he says, the spotlight didn't catch it, but she shook her head and he nodded his head. And he turns it, he I think opens up the eyes of the people in the crowd, and even begrudgingly the cops, because you see a few of them start to crack. And and he says it himself, this is the cleanest routine I've ever done. but it's also filthy in a way because everybody knows what he's describing, but they're not using the word, which goes back to a lot of things that we've seen in stand-up comedy in the ensuing decades of like the word represents an idea. It's Louis C.K., someone who's also, persona non
Yeah.
grata, although he is a genius comic and no one's going to take that away from him. But he's like, I can't remember if it was the F word that you alluded to earlier.
He did a whole bit where he uses like 3 words, Louis C.K., that you can't use, and it was actually a brilliant bit. It was like the N word, it was the F word, the gay slur F word, and there was like
Yeah.
one other word. It might have been the R word. And but the way he makes it work is very, because he's brilliant. He is a brilliant writer. He's a brilliant comedian. I mean, yeah, he's a pervert, and I know from other comedians that he's an asshole, but you can't take away the artistry behind what he does. Like if you look at a show like Louis, like that's a mixture between a comedy show and like a French New Wave film at certain points. It's unlike anything else that we've seen. Now, should he have been canceled forever? I don't know. That's a hard one because I'm a white man talking about it. What am I going to know? Because like these, like I didn't need it from a woman's perspective. It's like, well, what does it feel like when someone wants to just jerk off in front of you? Like what's their viewpoint going to be compared to mine?
That's a whole other conversation, and it's something I've got my own point of view on it, but I think it clashes with a lot of people's points of view, which makes me bring up another point of view. Because from what I understand, I'm going to say it with an asterisk because I don't know all the stories, but from what I understand, he asked, can I do this in front of you? And people said yes.
Yeah.
Now there's that whole idea of the power dynamic and all that, but then that brings in the question of agency. I'm like, well, what are you gonna tell me here? You were afraid to say no. I understand, but you still said yes.
Yeah.
What is what does that mean? It's not something I want to litigate here. And, I'm sure there are going to be books written about it for decades, but throwing him in with the likes of like a Harvey Weinstein and that whole culture, Me Too melange, I think is a bit unfair. It's kind of like the whole Aziz Ansari thing, where I think years later now people agree, yeah, that was a terrible date, but it was on the part of 2 adults making adult decisions that didn't work out well. It's nothing to run to the tabloids about.
Oh yeah, Aziz Ansari didn't do anything. That was just some bullshit. That was just like when they try to cancel Al Franken, because he hovered his hands over someone's boobs while they were asleep. It's like you're getting rid of him over that. But yeah, but jumping back into the film, why do you think that audiences had trouble getting the context of his jokes, and why do you think the public did, like the institutions that controlled this country, had trouble understanding what Lenny Bruce was trying to say at the time? Was it just because it was offensive, or because he was going against the system that runs everything?
That's hard to say because I wasn't alive back then.
I wasn't either, so yeah.
But I mean, it's strange, and I want to be very careful here, but we can look at examples from the last 5 years where you've got people who come out against the popular narrative and are instantly shouted down out of fear and being told that they're absolutely wrong and there's no way they could be right.
Yeah.
On a myriad issues, I'm going to say, again, this is coming from a sort of a right-wing perspective. People who are skeptical about COVID, people who are skeptical about the stability of President Biden. And then you look back, a year, 2 years, 5 years, and like, they weren't completely crazy, at least not on everything. But at the time they were canceled. They were kicked out of the military, all these, social consequences. But we didn't have necessarily a Lenny Bruce who broke through and became sort of a cultural lightning rod of entertainment who survived that necessarily, at least not that I can think of. But I think that's the answer to your question. There are, society has certain opinions about certain things, even as divided as we are today. There are certain things we probably would disagree or would all agree on, maybe. But then you've got someone coming out and saying, well, hey, have you ever considered looking at it from this perspective? And if it's so striking and so against the common wisdom that people are like, no, sit down, that's dangerous. What are you talking about? That's what we're talking about with Lenny Bruce.
Yeah, and the thing with that is that I mean, I don't know if people should have been canceled over the whole anti-vaccine COVID thing. Like, honestly, was kind of on the side where it's like, no, you have to take your vaccines. Like, like, why would I go against what a doctor says? But
also there were doctors who said that was nonsense and they got canceled and silenced. So that's the thing, is there was that whole meme of trust the science. There is no the science. There are people who, again, this is a giant political mess.
yeah,
But I understand people being skeptical of these giant organizations who, on the one hand, the year before COVID, the left was very skeptical of big pharma. A year into COVID, they're saying you've got to trust big pharma. They wouldn't lead us wrong. So I don't blame people for getting mixed messages when it comes to the culture.
Yeah, and especially now with the internet. I mean, I saw Eddington recently, and that movie I thought did a great job of showing how algorithm really forms our mind and our opinion. Rather than fact checking and going around and seeing what is actually proven, people just get different news sources from everywhere, and that's what kind of causes this misinformation that we're constantly surrounded by. But you're right, there's a lot of people who, because we don't want to listen to a differentiation of opinion. It's more like, oh, you don't agree with me, you're a terrible person, I hate you, get the hell out of my country. And it's like, guess what, I have friends who are on the right. I have people who raised me who are on the right, who believe in some very fucked up things, but I still don't think they're bad people. They just, maybe don't have certain opinions that I agree with, and some things that are just, well, in my opinion, are objectively wrong, such as their racism. But there's but we're losing our ability in this country to really communicate with each other. And I think we've always had that problem. I think we're always will have that problem because, unfortunately, humanity, people, we're a messy species. We want to conflict and fight each other rather than listen to our opinions and respects them. Like, if I didn't go to red states and I didn't, go to the bars that I did and hang out with the people I did, maybe I would have been in my little bubble too. For instance, I was telling a critic friend about a screenplay I wanted to write about, and the screenplay is literally about someone who gets canceled. And like, when she said, well, why do you want to do a movie about someone who gets canceled, I told her the reasons, and she looked disgusted and then left. And it's like, and that's it's not hard to guess who I'm talking about, but yeah.
Well, but I love that phrase that you used, a messy species, and that's true. And when you say we want conflict and we want to fight each other, I don't think that's true. I
we
think
don't want to, but we do it because we're so smart that we don't know how to handle each other's own intellect. But yeah, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, but I think that gets to, that's a bigger philosophical conversation, because it's, again, going back to another Bill Hicks joke where he's like, if you're watching the news, all you see is war, famine, death, destruction, and you look out your window and he does the crickets chirping sound.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not stepping out of our house every day unless we're literally in a war-torn country and fighting with people, punching with people, screaming at each other. Usually you go to the grocery store, you're buying your stuff, and there's a nice checkout lady, and someone, maybe you stop and help an old lady to her car with her groceries or something. People are generally good, despite, racial or religious differences. But there is something, I'm not going to get all conspiratorial, but there's something in the air and definitely in the internet that wants to create that division and expand it and feed on it like social vampirism or something. So I think it is important to look at, a movie like Lenny, where he's really trying to snap people out of their kind of stolid, or steadfast ways of thinking, get them to think differently, get them to look at each other differently and say, you know what, we don't need to be divided by race. There's something else going on here. And it's the systemic oppression that won't let us talk about race in certain ways. You know, you mentioned you've got friends and family on the right. I've got friends and family on the right and left and all that stuff. And the important thing is that they're still friends and family. You know, if we disagree on something, sometimes we hash it out. Sometimes we don't talk about it. Sometimes we joke about it. And that's the thing. It's like we used to be able to do that without saying, I'm not going to Thanksgiving dinner with my family because they voted differently than I. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, which I was guilty of doing that at one point. Like I went to Thanksgiving dinner, but then I left Thanksgiving dinner and I took a friend of mine out who I don't think he had plans for Thanksgiving, so I took him to my job and we basically had keys to the club that day and we just, hung out there, had a few beers,
That sounds cool.
played some video games. Yeah, it was like, oh, I'm actually helping other people on Thanksgiving, which is what you're supposed to do, but we don't do, And I remember I called like homeless shelters because I didn't want to be with my family. I was like, I'll just go to a homeless shelter and give out turkey or whatever. And I guess like all the homeless shelters were booked that day, which I didn't know was a thing. I didn't know people
booked for volunteers, you mean?
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean,
that is.
that's what you want to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was great. And I mean, Lenny was was a guy who knew how to, like, he wanted to bring people together through his work, but instead, it was the court system and America's institutions that didn't want him to do that, and they wanted to kind of stay in their safe little bubble while not having someone go out there and speak the truth. I mean, Dustin Hoffman's performance is great. I think it really, because like it fits towards Dustin Hoffman, because Dustin Hoffman has this very big open personality, which works perfectly for Lenny Bruce's character. And I think I'm gonna call her Miss Tessmacher, but I got her name right here. Valerie
Perrine.
Perrine. Yeah. Her performance as Honey was really good because she kind of plays this, and maybe is a little too well performed, but she plays this kind of. And I don't know anything about Valerie Perrine in real life, but she's great at playing kind of like these ditzy sort of characters that aren't really fully aware what's going on around them all the time, and aren't really the smartest people in the world. But she was fantastic in the movie. And I mean, I feel like his relationship and her relationship, they kind of matched for each other, because they were both sort of counterculture. She's like, I'm a stripper, I show my body, people don't like really accept that. He's like, I'm a comedian, I say things that make people upset, let's get together. And I could see why that brought them together, but it was also a toxic relationship because they were both addicts. And I think if Lenny had someone in his life who would help sober him up, I think he would have lived a lot longer.
But that's the impossible question is, would he have become Lenny Bruce if he had someone who tried to, this is going to sound terrible, but tried to rein him in and make him a decent, upstanding citizen? Could he have become that? B, if he had become that, would he have, because that's not Lenny Bruce. That's not the guy who's fighting against the system. That's the guy who's like, right, I'm going to stop drinking and taking drugs. I'm just going to settle down those suburbs and get a nice accounting job. Right. Or would he have ended up being so powerful a force of personality, he corrupted that person who was trying to, I mean, we kind of get a version of that here, but she was, Honey was already, as you mentioned, kind of a fringe societal character. Now, I want to talk about Valerie Perrine because I had only known her, I think, as Miss Tessmacher.
Yeah.
She completely surprised me in this film because she has two distinct, not personalities, but stages of life that she plays here. The young Honey, which, as you mentioned, is kind of naive and she gets kind of taken for a ride, but then she ends up doing 2 years in jail for getting busted in Honolulu. But as the framing device of this movie shows, there's an anonymous interviewer. It's very Citizen Kane, down to the black and white, as you mentioned, going over this kind of mysterious subject. But those interview sequences with her in whatever the modern day version is, I felt like I was watching the actress and not an actress acting. It's so natural that you wonder, like, how is she pulling this off? What was her audition like? Did she just go in and say, "Hey, I'm Valerie, I want to talk about drugs"? I mean, it's the ultimate in naturalism, and I was completely enraptured.
Yeah, well, she really kind of captures that kind of, and it's gonna sound wrong, but she's great at kind of capturing this brain dead character. She's someone who, and I shouldn't say brain dead. It's not an appropriate term,
I
but
coming from, but I think that
yeah,
it's one of those characters like because she spends so much of the movie talking about her life in relation to this other person, we
yeah.
don't really get a sense of her
Hmm.
except that she sounds more cleaned up, a bit more mature in those kind of present day sequences. So I feel like there's more to her than that, but the movie doesn't quite give us that opportunity.
Yeah, we don't really get to know much about her. She's more of like someone who helps enable Lenny to continue to do drugs as they're sort of in this downward spiral of a relationship that, ultimately falls apart. But yeah, I mean her performance was very believable. I saw the character. I didn't see the actress when I was watching that scene. Where with Dustin Hoffman, like he's great in it, but I still saw Dustin Hoffman. I was like, oh, it's just Dustin Hoffman doing stand up and saying offensive things. Okay. Well, I'm used to Dustin Hoffman kind of being very performative. So, that's something that goes within his wheelhouse. But yeah, it's funny how hypocritical that cancel culture is. Like you were saying earlier, when he's asking everyone in the audience, like, oh, who said cocksucker? And, most people raise their hands. It's like, yeah, we do these things, we say these things behind closed doors. It's just that someone's saying it out in the open. And it's like there's certain things you shouldn't say in public and certain things you do. Now, for instance, if you're the president, maybe you shouldn't say offensive things all the time. But if
Well, but
you're
I
a
mean,
public,
it depends on what you mean by offensive. I can
yeah,
think of a dozen things that Joe Biden said during his presidency and Kamala Harris that I guarantee offended a lot of people.
yeah.
He didn't say them in quite the same colorful language as Trump, but I mean, you're not good. Yeah, and part of that is the partisan political divide. But Trump has said things that are very offensive, but his political opponents have said things that are equally offensive, but perhaps not using the same language.
Okay, I can understand. I mean, I still don't think anyone is saying grab them by the pussy or they're, calling
Well, no,
Mexicans rapists or
well, okay, he didn't call all Mexicans rapists. He was
said some
talking
of them were.
yes, and you know what? That's true because some of every kind of person is a rapist. And on
Yeah.
top of that, the whole grab them by the pussy thing, that goes back to, hey, who in here has ever used the word cocksucker?
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you, Mike, that you in private over the course of your, 40 years or whatever, have said things that if someone were to transcribe them or record them or overhear them would
Oh,
get
I'd
you in
be
a
dead.
lot
I'd
of
be
trouble.
gone. Yeah.
Right. So I'm not
Yeah.
that doesn't wash with me. It never did.
Yeah, okay. I can understand that. I can understand that. But I mean, yeah, it's funny. We use these offensive words and we end up losing our careers over them. And we really shouldn't. And I mean, this movie it ends literally with Lenny Bruce dead in his bathroom. With the I forgot to put up the spoil. Whatever, the movie came out in 1974. Jesus
Right.
Christ, people! Like that's actually a real. I thought. Okay, here's what I thought. The last photo of the movie wasn't very tasteful because Lenny Bruce had a friend of his who didn't want that picture to come out publicly, in order to protect his image. And this movie's supposed to respect Lenny Bruce while also seeing his flaws. Did we need to see the actual photo of him naked in his bathroom with a syringe in his arm? Like, was that a necessary final shot in the film? It felt a bit more exploitive than it did. Like, I get what it's trying to say, but it's trying to say, don't fall to your addiction, be the best artist you can be, don't let society that tries to cancel you get the better half or get the worst half of you. But we didn't need that final shot to communicate that. The whole movie communicates that. So when they try to condense it in that one sequence, it didn't work for me.
I understand where you're coming from, but I can also see now, I don't know if anybody had made promises to Bruce's friend or family or whatever that they wouldn't show that image or whatever. If they broke a promise, then that's wrong. But in terms of a final image, I feel like that is in line with that's sort of in line with the thesis statement of the entire movie is nothing is off limits. This is the literal naked
Mm.
truth of the life and death of Lenny Bruce. So why not show it in all of its kind of tragic glory? It's hard to look at for sure, but I think it's of a piece.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I'm gonna wrap things up here because there's a lot that I wanted to cover, but I don't know. I didn't get to see the movie as much as I wanted to. But how do you think? Oh, here's a question I wrote up here. How do you
All
think
right.
stand-up comedy is helpful in a world that's very sad and full of death and all that? Like, how do you think stand-up comedy, especially subversive comedy, helps gets us through that? And what was Lenny Bruce's comedy like in relation to that?
Well, I mean, it's again, I'm kind of like with you. I appreciate Lenny Bruce as a cultural figure, but because I wasn't of his time, listening to his stuff now is more of a historical artifact. I'm not, hunched over laughing, although I did think the blobbity blah segment was, pretty brilliant. And I did
Yeah,
laugh at that because I thought it was like, what a great way to turn things around. But
yeah,
I think the people who came after him, I do think are laugh out loud funny, like,
oh yeah,
Carlin Hicks, even, Mitch Hedberg to a certain extent as
oh
far as the
yeah,
absurdity, right? Um, but I think stand-up comedy is important in that, and Shane Gillis even, when he goes on, like, he's very hit or miss for me. Like when he's hosted Saturday
yeah,
Night Live, I'm like, I appreciate that he's up there doing that stuff, but in terms of like the actual delivery, it comes sometimes kind of feels like, oh, he's the subversive anti-woke guy, so just him being on stage says something, but then when you listen to what he's saying, like, that's fine, but you're not making a strong case for why he should be here on this stage.
yeah,
But I think the stuff he did at ESPN, I caught a bit of that, and I was like, that's funny, right?
yeah,
Um, but as far as stand-up comedy, I think I like it clean. I also like it dirty and subversive, but I mostly like it subversive because, as you point out, anybody can like list off body parts or talk about certain acts and stuff, and it's not saying anything. I
mhm,
like people who get up there and trying to either approach things in a humorous way that I haven't thought about, or get me to reconsider, recontextualize things, or try and break my brain by hammering a message that's persuasive and get me to come out of there thinking, I gotta reevaluate my life. Now that's very rare and far between, but I think that's what makes it, special when people do discover it.
yeah. I like it because it makes us see kind of like the things in society that are unusual, that are painful, and we're able to laugh at that. We're able to sort of find a sort of healing through comedy. That I mean, you have to be able to joke about everything in order to take power away from not only just words but events, and also like let us help us heal through events. And when someone can introduce comedy that can maybe make you say, you know what, I didn't think of it that way, that is kind of funny and that's kind of true, then it kind of opens up your mind a bit. Because there's a reason why a lot of late night people get a lot of attention when it comes to news sources, because comedy can break down the news better than the news a lot of times, in my opinion, because they can find something, see how ridiculous it is, and then commentate on that. And then an audience can watch that and go, "Oh yeah, I never thought about that. That's a good point." So it's being able to heal, it's being able to change perspectives, and and it's all wrapped through by analyzing them and turning them into humor. And it's like if we just try to make inoffensive, clean jokes all the time, we're not going to evolve, and we're not going to really do much when it comes to the art form of comedy. We're just going to constantly make easy knock knock jokes for everyone, and that won't get us anywhere. We need to actually have comics like Lenny Bruce take on the status quo, to have us see things through a different perspective, and for us to be able to laugh at the pain that we're going through. So yeah, that's super important. I want to bring up the comments real quick. We have a comment from our user here, and this is from Beer. I don't know how to say that name. Whatever. Anyways, he says, "Hey guys, I'm sorry to bother you. Is this an open stream? Like call in? Sorry for asking. Wait, like the radio? I mean, I guess like if we had technology like that, but
No, I don't know,
yeah.
because you said we're wrapping up here, but I would say to our commenter, if you had like a question or something, you can type it into a comment and we can respond to it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the
Maybe he's
extent
still
of a
there.
call-in, I think. Yeah.
But yeah, maybe I should have pulled that up a little sooner. I'm still learning. All right. Anyways,
Comments are tricky.
yeah. Anyways, if you were to give this movie out of 4 Guinnesses, and I include the halves, 1 out of 4, what would you give it?
I mean, honestly, I would give it a 4. I
Okay,
mean,
4 out
that's
of 4 from Ian.
yeah, because again, I love being able to check a movie off my bucket list and have it live up to what I'd heard about it. And now I'm wondering, why don't people talk about this movie more? Because it doesn't even have a proper home video release.
Mm-mm.
So like, and for folks who are watching this now, you can watch it on Amazon Prime for quote unquote free, but it's leaving after like 8 days.
Really?
I don't know if that
Wow.
means that it's going to be not free anymore, if you're going to have to like rent it and pay $4 or whatever. But if you're interested at all, you haven't seen this, watch it now, prioritize it.
Yeah, yeah. I saw it on Amazon, and I only pay like $3 extra a month to get rid of the ads, and it's totally worth it. I can't watch TV anymore without with ads. I just can't. I've I that's one thing I don't miss from growing up. I'm nostalgic for a lot of things, but not that. But yeah, I mean, if I were to give this movie a star rating, I would give it 3.5 out of 4. I thought, it's a movie that is very topical today. It's a biopic that doesn't play like most biopics. It's really it feels like you're watching like a documentary / death tape. It's very downlifting, but it's an important film about censorship and addiction and hypocrisy. And it's a movie that is not it's about stand-up comedy, but it's a very dark, sad movie, but it's okay. There's also some comedy in it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, don't wind up like Lenny Bruce. Don't wear a trench coat with a shoot missing and reading your court transcripts in front of an audience for 40 minutes. But before we take off, Ian, please plug what you got going on, and then I'll plug my stuff, and then we'll be on our way.
Well, thank you, sir. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also right here on YouTube. I do weekly live streams and filmmaker interviews, movie reviews, commentary, that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's my bit.
All right, great. And if you want to check out my stuff, it's at ypareviews.com. The YPA stands for You'll Probably Agree. You can find me on all the social medias at YPA Reviews. But if you go on TikTok, go to YPA Review Chicago. I have little clips from my show on here. I have movie reactions, and once in a while, I'll put in some game clips because what the hell? Why not? I can do whatever I want. But
That's right.
yeah,
Thanks to people like Lenny Bruce.
Exactly. I don't know. I'm thinking of Cartman now when he came on stage on Dr. Phil. He's like, "Whatever, I can do what I want." But yeah, I don't know. I love South Park, but yeah. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like, subscribe, and all that. And until then, we will see you later for our next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.